excavated at a vast cost and dropped 30 feet. That's now the Irving truck stop. The land directly to the north between the off-ramp, southbound off-ramp off 9312S is DOT land. We'll be talking about that for the parking and the refuse container. Interestingly, our property is the zoning line. Everything to the north towards the exit ramp is considered residential land. It's owned by the state. I doubt we'll ever see a residence built there, but that's just where Concord put the line. Next slide, please, Laura. That's approaching the site headed from north to south. So coming down South Main Street, you can see the Gambrell House. That's our office. And the feature to note here is how steep the slope is. When you look at the building in the far back, that's the Days Inn. That slope at our driveway at the building is a 2-to-1 slope. Next slide would be handy. Again, this is the same highway. It's from South Main Street, North New Hampshire 3A, headed north. We're down by Gentle Dental, and there's the Cumberland Farms on the right, and you can see the back of the hotel and how steep the embankment is. The next, just to show you, because this helps prove the hardship, we asked our engineers to design a restaurant building that would eliminate the need for parking. That's the main variance we're here to talk about, parking in the front yard where it isn't allowed. If we designed the building for the restaurant so there was no parking in the front yard, but it complied with the other requirements of setbacks, that's how the restaurant would look. It would be about 20+ feet wide, and it'd be this long building, and obviously isn't practical.
Yeah. Is the restaurant the red?
Yes, sorry. The restaurant's the red, hotel's the blue. Now, just by stepping back, we went to the development. When you want to do a development in Concord, you go to a development team meeting. And we talked about where to put the hotel and restaurant. And originally, we showed the hotel and restaurant out on the 93 side because that's the source of business. And there was mixed feelings. With the development team is the city engineer, the city planner, the code enforcement, general services is there, the deputy city manager's there. And there was a lot of discussion, and there was a debate back and forth whether we should put it on the 3A side or the 93 side. We had designed the buildings originally to have them both on the 93 side, thinking that the parking was less attractive and that should be on the 3A, and it was consistent with everything you see on 3A because you have Grapponi Ford, Honda, and everything else with hundreds of cars out there. That's what we took for our instruction. We went to file a site plan, and then lo and behold, as you'll see in our site plan, we were in violation of the zoning because we have parking in a front yard, which isn't permitted. So what we tried to do was design the biggest building, which is the blue building, 4-story hotel building, and make that comply. That's out at 3A. It doesn't need the visibility as long as we have the signage. The restaurant was the lower building, put that out. But anyway, that shows you if we tried to build a restaurant, and that does not work as anybody's restaurant, even a McDonald's, that's what the building would have to look like to comply. Let me show you the next one. Then I said, okay, let's design the restaurant shape and create the separation that would be required by code between the hotel and the restaurant and see how that works. And that shows you there's no room for a driveway. And I'll talk about the driveway a little bit more in a minute. Then we said, okay, let's put the restaurant and attach it to the hotel, which is not allowed by most franchise hotels today because you don't want your franchise to suffer if the hotel fails, and most restaurants don't, particularly if they're a chain restaurant, don't want to be burdened with the good and bad TripAdvisor reviews from the hotel. But if we attach the restaurant to the hotel so there was no parking in the front yard, which is Route 3A, could you do it? Yes, you could, but you actually couldn't unless you had the state land, which you're leasing, and that's been leased only for parking, not for an access way. So then, let's go to the next slide. That's the layout that we proposed. We put the hotel on the 3A side. We put the restaurant on the point. It's a lower building. And the next slide will show you where we're talking about for the variance. So we have an administrative appeal which becomes moot if we win the variances, but Craig decided, and Concord zoning ordinance allows multiple principal uses on a lot. I will point out it's allowed and it's part of our code. It's a little unusual because the definition of principal, in my mind, means principal. And if you look at Nashua zoning ordinance, Portsmouth zoning ordinance, Manchester's, they all talk about a principal use. But nonetheless, when we went to file this plan, we got told, gee, you need a variance because you want to put parking in the front yard, and that's not allowed. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk about that. And then when we get to variances 2 and 3, that is state land. And on the first photo I showed you, there's that big gap between our north property line and the southbound ramp, and we'll go back and show you that. The state's agreed to lease us that land between the off-ramp, the round circle, there we go, you've got the pointer there, sort of, yeah, that land. They've agreed to lease a strip of land there. And that's, so it's, believe it or not, the city's zoning line treats everything north of our property line as residential. That's state-owned land. There will never be a residential use in the land between the off-ramp and our property line. And then another variance that we're looking for, we'll get to, is we want 1 loading area instead of 2. You need an area for a big food service truck. The hotel has very limited breakfast. It's like a Comfort Inn. We don't have deliveries, maybe once a month. We really have no use for a truck. And frankly, we think some of our guests who stay at the hotel are going to be the truckers who park their trucks down below, and they park their trucks at the truck stop. They're not going to park up here. So we thought providing 1 truck, which could then load right into the restaurant, and we didn't think having a truck parking spot for a semi should be out on 93 side. So that's the basis of that. And then you're supposed to have a refuse container on your lot. We're putting it over on the state land. We wanted to have it to be more proximate to the restaurant because they're the generators of the waste. So it's not on our land, and it's, by the way, it's in an RO district because that whole row of parking you see where that circle is at the zoning line. And then I just wanted to show you this. I was pointed out before the hearing, on the 14th, the state is going to have the governor and council hearing to set the corridor for the 93 improvement project. I was asked to serve on a committee with the manager, the deputy manager, with Phil Hastings, who's here, and the mayor to meet with DOT to go over the alternatives. There's a lot of discussion about what we should do up at 13, 14, and 15, but there's no discussion or debate about really what's going to happen down at exit 12. You will recall they've already rebuilt the bridge over exit 12. So that's not moving. And they built it so that if they widen the highway, it can incorporate it. But this is what they call option F, and this is, what's the point of this one?
Red button.
Red button. So what's going to happen, here we go. It's not having much luck with the red button here.
Let's try the red button.
Oh, there we go. I don't know. Anyway, I can do this way.
Because I can't see red.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, all you need to know is this is the hotel site, and right now there's a southbound ramp. That's going to be eliminated, and by the way, the northbound ramp from 93 South is going to be eliminated, and at both ends of the bridge they're putting in a roundabout. And the reason that's relevant, so when you want to go, you'll come through the highway, you'll get off on what used to be called 12N, you'll come up into a roundabout and down. As the owner of the hotel, as you can imagine, I was pretty interested in that from a selfish standpoint. And the reason that's relevant is that's our driveway. Believe it or not, this actually, I said, why wouldn't we put a traffic signal in, thinking that'd be easier? The roundabouts actually work better in flow of traffic and letting getting cars in and out. But the reason it's relevant to this case is our driveway cannot move. I can't move the driveway closer to the roundabout because the state's designed it. If it gets too close to the roundabout doesn't work. So the entire design of the state has been assuming our driveway doesn't move. So then I thought, okay, to handle this case, maybe we'll just slide it the other way. But then we put it too close to Gentle Dental, and you have 2 driveways less than 25 or 50 feet apart, and you have a 2-to-1 slope at this end of the site. So it's not, you're never going to get the site distance you need. So the entire roundabout has been designed assuming that our entrance doesn't change. And even in making our, we were approved by the Long Range Planning Committee and Governor and Council to lease this land, one of the considerations we raised was, could we move our entrance further north? And the answer is no, because it will impact this design. So that is a constricting feature of the land which was imposed on us by the state, which I don't think we can do much about. So let's go to the slide that shows the variance we're asking. There we go. So we're in non-compliance because the front of the restaurant is on the 3A side, and I want to talk about that a little bit. There was a case in 2015, which you'll remember, Goodwill, and there was a discussion about whether they could have parking on the Loudon Road side. And Craig had pointed out that in 2011, the city changed the zoning because they were very concerned about the walkability along Loudon Road, and if you put the parking between the sidewalk and the building, people have to navigate through parking to get to your front door. And that was determined not to be a wise feature. So that's how that requirement came about. But in this case, there's virtually no walkability. No one walks to this restaurant from downtown Concord. There's very little pedestrian traffic there. There is a sidewalk. It's rarely used. In terms of meeting the basic interpretation of the ordinance of we don't want parking between where you'd walk to get to the restaurant and the restaurant, it really isn't a factor here. So in terms of hardship, we have a very narrow lot at the throat. I think we've showed you we can't design the restaurant and put it out at the frontage and be able to access parking in the back. It's steeply sloped. Frankly, I'm not even sure if we cut the slope down and convince the state to move the driveway, we could make it work, and they've already set that boundary. It's also an odd-shaped lot. It's narrower at the front and wider. So we thought the best effort was to design the biggest building, the hotel, and make that comply, which we have, although ideally you'd put that out where it could be seen more, and then put the lower building towards the back. Again, this section and this requirement of the ordinance was designed to improve walkability between sidewalk people, like you see on Loudon Road a lot from the apartments, going into businesses and not having to navigate through parking. That's just not the case here. There is no foot traffic. I can attest to that, having owned the Days Inn for a number of years. So both of these uses are permitted uses, so they're reasonable. That's one of the criteria for hardship. It's clearly not contrary to the public interest. Here we are in partial compliance. The character of the neighborhood is all commercial, and in fact, if you go 50 feet further, you see nothing but cars parked in front, albeit that's over the town line in Bow, but you see nothing but autos there. This won't threaten the public health or safety. Frankly, I would argue trying to increase pedestrian traffic would actually hurt the safety of the neighborhood. It would be dangerous to try and create more walkability where that's a roundabout and it's a highway exit. I think we're consistent with the purpose of the ordinance, which, again, the whole idea of not allowing parking in front was to help walkable neighborhoods. This isn't. And I think this would do substantial justice because there's no great gain to the public by not allowing parking there, and it certainly makes it virtually impossible for us to develop a restaurant without it. You can't build a franchised hotel if you don't have a restaurant in walking distance. That's just sort of a given. The Comfort Inn, you can walk to the Common Man. The Fairfield, you can walk to the Common Man. The Residence Inn, you can walk to the Common Man. The only restaurant you can walk to here is Dunkin' Donuts, which really doesn't qualify as a restaurant. Similarly, restaurants like to be near hotels.
What about that Subway?
What Subway?
There's a Subway inside that gas station.
There we go, you're right. Finest dining. It's a good Subway. So, I mean, I think we're in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance. We've complied as much as we can. We can't realign the driveway so that we could put the restaurant on the 3A side and still have access to the site. Realistically, we didn't even consider this as a principal use. You know, if we attach this, I could avoid the issue, but again, the problem with attaching a restaurant to a hotel is if the hotel gets bad TripAdvisor reviews, that affects the restaurant and vice versa, and that's why you see them separated. You only have to look at the Holiday Inn, which has tried running a restaurant. It's a tough thing, and any hotel operator will tell you that. And the other thing to keep in mind is the spirit of the ordinance is that we redevelop land consistent with the master plan. The master plan calls for redevelopment of older sites. This building was built in 1965, and when I bought it, the first thing we did is we hired the same architect who did Church Landing up in Meredith and said, I'm going to turn this into a wonderful country inn. Regrettably, here's what we've learned about the motel business. There is no room for the motel business anymore in society when you have an opioid crisis. And my point is this. In our hotels, if somebody comes in to check into a hotel, they have to go through a front desk. They cannot get to their hotel room unless they check in. When you have a motel that's 70 yards long, we literally, I think it's been reported in the paper, we've had opioid deaths there. You rent a room to somebody, they have good credit, they aren't on our list of convicted felons we don't want to rent to, check into a room, you can't patrol that whole area, and you can't control who comes as guests. And frankly, you cannot run a motel anymore in the city of Concord. You have to have a controlled entry point. We looked at rehabilitating the hotel. We used Salmon D'Elia. They did a great design. We could have made it look like Church Landing, and then we concluded, after talking to all the experts, we know there's no way to police it unless you can cut off access. The other thing we learned, regrettably, is the hotel was built in 1965 when the most common building product was asbestos. Let's use it for everything and put it everywhere. And it's really not conducive to having hotel rooms. To rehabilitate it, you have to take it down to the frame, and it isn't sprinkled. So the ordinance, the spirit of the ordinance is to allow redevelopment. This is a prime visibility site. By the way, I had opportunities to sell it to car dealerships, and they could stack cars there, left and right, without, and they meet the, it's allowed in that zoning. It would be ugly as all get out. Not that I have anything against car dealerships. I just don't think that presents very well for the city of Concord. The hardship essentially is the steepness of the lot, the fact we can't relocate the driveway, and the narrow throat, and it's impossible to comply. I'll talk about the other two. Obviously, we're asking for dedicated off-site parking in an RO district. That's not allowed. I think the drawing of that line was completely arbitrary. I mean, the first residential is on the north side of 93, the north and towards 2 Pillsbury Street, and the line happened to be drawn there. This is land the state isn't going to use. They've already approved a long-term lease, and it's 1 row of parking. Believe it or not, I'd like to take the rest of that land, particularly when they get rid of the exit, and just put like 10,000 daffodils out there, so we really are eye-catching, but you have to get permission to do that unless we plant them at night, which happens sometimes. But again, I think the same requirements are there. We could, and we may visit the issue of how much parking a hotel needs, because I'm sort of the parking guru on hotel space needs, but we thought this was conducive and consistent with the ordinance, didn't impact the residential zone, actually allows for a much better flow on the site, so it prevents any kind of hardship in terms of people who are parking, trying to get access to the restaurant. Most of that parking will be used by the restaurant, and we thought it was a great use of the land. Go ahead.
Just to jump in, Steve, so the reason why there's 2 variance requests here is to sort of accomplish the structure needed for the variance request. So alternative parking arrangements are allowed. You can have some parking off-site if it's approved by the planning board. We anticipate pursuing that. The only sort of catch that we didn't quite meet is that in order to do that, the parking has to either be a permitted use or the property has to be in the same district, and as you can see here, we don't have that. So this combination of the variances allows for the alternative parking arrangement in the RO district.
And then with respect to the off-street loading, under the requirements you need 2. Realistically, other than unloading our furniture when we build it, there will never be a semi that delivers anything to this hotel. There's nothing to deliver. We do a continental breakfast. There are no other meals in the restaurant. That's why in the hotel. And so we thought 1 space made sense instead of the 2, and putting it not out on the highway side, even though it's a little less convenient for the restaurant, just we thought was aesthetically smart to do for Concord. And then, go ahead.
And Steve, you were saying that it's common practice for restaurants to have hand trucks that bring deliveries back and forth.
Look at Main Street every morning.
And it makes sense to share a loading dock here because the property is going to be condominiumized.
Right.
So part of the shared space would be the shared loading dock, and there would be the separate condoed unit for the hotel and the separate condoed unit for the restaurant.
All the parking's going to be condominiumized, so sharing it makes sense. And then the refuse container is technically off-site because we propose to put it on the state land. We picked that location. That's all going to be fenced, obviously. But our thinking there was it's the best spot for access to the restaurant. They're the primary user. Hotels really don't generate much waste. So it's off-site and it's in an RO district.
And And because it's sort of that strange RO district classification that's sort of a little bit of a hard fit for this DOT land, it's not going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood to have a refuse container right on the boundary there. And there is, again, that we have this double variance 5 and 6, and what that technicality allows is a refuse container located within 25 feet of a boundary line of the RO district. And again, that's part of the unique characteristics of the lot. It's that weird classification of the DOT on and off ramp as RO district.
Yeah, I mean, it was just drawn there because that was the last commercial use till you cross the highway. You know, when we asked DOT if they had any input when the zone was, they said, heck, we didn't even know how it was zoned because we don't pay attention to zoning. So, we think this is, you know, good use, that the way to put short of making the restaurant part of the hotel, which means you can't do the rest. Maybe there's a restaurant that do it, but there is not a hotel chain that will do it if you're not in an urban area. There is no way to put those two uses, and one needs the other, but can't be so closely tied. There's no way on this piece of land with the narrow throat, the steep slope, and the SEP driveway that we can comply and put the restaurant on the 3A side, unless we flip the hotel back. And we tried to make the biggest building the most compliant.
So for all of the reasons that we've said here, we hope that you grant the variances that we've requested. Of course, we'd like to take questions that you have. Just one final note, if you are able to grant the variances here, it would be consistent with the master plan, as Steve indicated, because it's redevelopment of property that had previously been developed and would otherwise sort of flounder. And it draws visitors to Concord that's in addition to areas other than downtown. So this sort of expands Concord's draw. And it promotes the public safety and the aesthetics. We've come up with a somewhat aesthetically pleasing design that could proceed if you grant these variances. Thank you.
Questions from members of the board?
The dumpster, okay, I did know, I just answered one of my questions. There is a dumpster set up for the hotel, correct?
Yeah.
That's correct.
So
Yep.
this is the dumpster for the restaurant only.
Correct.
Couldn't that dumpster be located on the parking on the western side of the property there?
There's also a you mean the dumpster that's at the
You have
northeast corner?
The circle one.
Northwest? Yeah.
So you have it off the property technically. If it
Yes.
was on that other row
For
of parking
space.
spots, could it be in that corner?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Then there's no variance for being off-site.
But not to jump to their rescue, in this
Yeah.
one case, I
Go ahead.
might suggest that the access with the dump truck, if it was moved around the corner on the west side there, would be difficult. I assume part of the reason you put it there in the first place is so the
Access.
truck could
To sell it.
straight in.
That's
and-
exactly right. Yeah. So TF Moran put together these plans for us. And another.
Wider aisle on
So-
that side.
Yeah.
So, right, you could get the truck in there. Okay,
Yeah.
well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Good question.
The other question I have is this, the reason for renting or leasing the DOT land is because you need additional parking?
Yeah, with this size restaurant, we do.
Is this the exact requirement for the hotel and restaurant?
Yes.
These numbers,
Yes.
spaces?
Yes, it
No
is.
more, no less?
No more, no less.
That's right.
Now, I will tell you, that's using the 25%, as the ordinance allows, 25% compact spaces. We were here a few months ago with the Historical Society lot, and I've done the 2 Pillsbury Street lot. Over 50% of the cars now qualify as compact. And, you know, again, I know we're going through a great zoning ordinance review and rewrite, but realistically, that percentage is low. Any given night, we're more than 50% of our hotels are compact, and we keep records of that. And then, not to date myself too much, but when I built the Comfort Inn in 1989, the ordinance was 2 spaces per hotel room. And everybody, as soon as we built it, said, oh my God, what's this sea of parking? And then when we did the Courtyard, the zoning ordinance was changed down to 1.5, and I go, my God, what's this sea of parking? And now it's 1.1, and to be honest, for a limited service hotel, 1.8, we're getting there, but 1.1's a little high. I think it really is about 0.8, 0.9. When you have an 82-room hotel, you're really likely to have about 40 cars. 50 maybe, and half of those will be compact. And then when you have a restaurant directly adjacent, a lot of the traffic, this is gonna be traffic headed north to the Lakes region that decides to have dinner, and they maybe have alcohol and they decide to stay at a hotel or vice versa. So there's gonna be overlap in parking. To be honest, I think we've got way too much parking. We're gonna talk with the planning staff about that. We've submitted future applications to come back and talk about that. We wanna show that we can provide all the space, but I think if we build it all, the city will be coming saying, why'd you build it all? In fact, when Steve Henninger was here, when we did the residence in, he cut us down twice, and we kept the land so we could add more parking if we needed it. We've never needed it. We've never had the parking lots full. And it's just the way the traveling public works now. I mean, you get some people who are one car, one person, but that isn't how most, even business travelers, like FEMA, when there was the disaster in Vermont with the floods, they took 3-month contract at the Residence Inn, and they all carpool because they're federal mandates that if you use the federal government rate, you have to carpool. So frankly, it is the right number of spaces. I think it's too many, but it's what's required.
But you will be coming back with.
Yeah, we'll be coming back with another one. We're gonna go talk to the
Yeah.
planning staff because I think they agree that it's also.
So the board can expect
Yeah.
to see something in the future.
Yeah, and the goal is you wanna have enough parking, but you don't wanna pave too much.
So you've got your property is in the CG, but immediately to the north is the DOT, which just happens to be an RO, just
Right.
because it's
there's
basically
no
this
use.
highway
Right.
use. So, do you have a lease with them?
Yes.
What are the terms of the lease?
The terms
Or
of the
length
lease.
of the lease, I should say.
So the state has a policy, when they have surplus land, they have to declare it and they have to offer it to the abutter. They're not prepared to call this surplus land until they're done, the 93 project, even though it's very unlikely they'll use this for anything. When they stage projects, they tend to go north of exit ramps and abutments so that there's less chance you get whacked. When they did exit 12, for example, all the equipment was stored on the north side of the bridge abutment. But they might need the rest of this land. I mean, you'd say, why wouldn't you lease it all to us? They may need it for staging when they work on exit 13. So they gave us a long-term lease. We had to have it appraised. The state did an appraisal. They came up with the terms. And then when they're done, the 93 project through Concord, they'll offer it to us for sale. But it's a 30-year lease, I think.
Okay, because I remember, I think it was your case with the gym, where that you were using parking on your adjacent property, and you
Gave a
a
lease.
big selling point was you had the lease, and you can guarantee there's
Yeah.
not gonna be any change because it's your own property, right?
Yep.
So, but here, I guess you're suggesting that there'd be absolutely no reason why DOT would pull it.
Right. I mean, they've given us a long-term lease. Once they're required by law, once they're done the project, to offer it as surplus land. That's not an option. Once they're done the project, now, your bet's as good as mine is when they're gonna be done the 93 expansion through Concord. Maybe I won't be around.
But
on
you're
the other
sure
hand.
that they won't need that land
Yeah.
as part of that?
Yeah, that's the reason they were comfortable leasing it to us at this point.
Because once they lock that in, then they
They're subject
committed
to a
to
lease.
anything.
Right. We actually would have liked more, but they didn't want to give us more because they want to have that. At first, they told us they might use it for drainage. And I was a little perplexed by that because it's 22 feet higher than the surface of the highway. I said, how is it you're going to use it for drainage? And they said, well, we might have to do a shear wall like they did down in Londonderry and dig down. And then I pointed out over on the east side of Route 3A, they've got that swamp which the state owns, which is their mitigation area. So they've concluded they don't need it for drainage. They aren't going to have an exit ramp. In fact, they're going to create more land because they're going to get rid of exit 12S. Now to get to Bow, you're going to have to go up and hit the 12, what you'd call the 12N ramp, and go through the roundabout and down.
So, I'm just trying to conceptualize this, is if granting this, and maybe it's just theoretical more than anything, but is it conditional on that lease staying in place? Because this is an indefinite variance, right? And
Yes, I mean,
your lease
if
is-
we didn't have the lease, we'd have to reduce the size of the restaurant.
So so their representation that this lease is enforced and that you're gonna use that parking is
Right.
essentially a condition of the variance by
Right.
the fact that you're staying
Right.
on.
And it's been approved by governor and council. I mean, it's gone through long-range planning and was
Yeah.
unanimously approved, and governor and council was unanimously approved. I mean, it's It's a signed deal.
Got it, okay. And then, and maybe it's just a technical thing, but, so you're actually, your application is asking for multiple variances relating to the CG, except the parking variances are really relating to the DOT lot. I mean, does that fall under the same batch of variances when it's really you're really asking for that on behalf of a separate lot, right?
Let's go back to the slide that shows, the main variance we need is that one right there, because we're not allowed to have parking in the front yard between a principal use.
So I think what you're getting at, Mr. Winters, is some of the criteria for an alternative parking arrangement. And as we sort of said briefly before, in order to have an alternative parking arrangement, which of course would be subject to the planning board's review, the parking that would be off-site has to be within the same district. And what we're asking for you to do here is to say, even though the parking that is off-site is not in the same district, we'll give you permission to do that alternative parking arrangement.
Oh, so
Go
ahead, go ahead.
And I would also assume that with your lease agreement, you are granted permission to make this request on behalf of the state of New Hampshire. Right.
Yes.
Okay, so it's
Yes,
fine to
thank you.
just procedurally lump that into one
Yeah.
request?
Exactly. Thank you.
So that was kind of, was a little, maybe still am confused by variance number 3 on the principal uses, because it's really not a request for any use that's not permitted, but the fact, right, I mean,
So-
there's no problem with the use here, obviously,
Right.
it's allowed, it's the fact that the parking is in a different zone.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So another way that an alternative parking arrangement can shake out is if parking is one of the quote-unquote principal permitted uses of that zone. And it just so happens that parking is not a principal use in the RO zone. So what we're trying to do is essentially make the make the property fit what could be an alternative parking arrangement, if only there weren't this sort of odd designation of RO.
Oh, I see, so basically the use that is not permitted is
In our
is
zone.
parking.
Right.
Exactly.
In an RO
You put a
zone.
big parking
Because-
lot in our zone.
Right,
Exactly.
because this is the line that was
Exactly.
drawn at our property line instead of over on the other side of 93 where there actually is
Who
a
knows why
residential
they put
district.
the ROs on there? I mean,
I guess there's
Oh,
no
well,
zone
then
for
I'll
just.
just explain that easily.